Thank you for tuning in to the MOA podcast, where a group of SRNAs break down the mechanics of anesthesia science, education, and beyond. Welcome to the second episode of this three-part series on transitioning from an RN to an SRNA. It is no secret the financial commitment that it takes to get through CRNA school. You get accepted to school, and then you go from having a consistent and quality income to having essentially nothing at all. This is stressful. There's no hiding it. The 3-year commitment of minimal income is what deters many from entering the field. So we're here to discuss the financial preparation one can take for CRNA school, and then what are some fiscally responsible strategies one can take part in during CRNA school to help put themselves in a position to be successful once they graduate. So Ben, what were some strategies that you took after you knew you got accepted to RFU? And then what are some fiscally responsible strategies that you're doing now?
Thanks, Eric. My dad's a financial advisor, so I'm really glad we're talking about this topic. I'm by no means a professional advisor of anything, but I definitely have a few comments to say on this because I am pretty passionate about this overall. So some kind of strategies that I took when I was accepted to RFU is I know it was during the time of COVID when I was applying, so that's a little bit luckier. But I did take several travel contracts during the COVID-19 pandemic. The contracts now obviously aren't as lucrative, but it still is an overall better way to make money a lot of times than staff. I also, right out of school, lived with my parents to save some money, and I know some people, are super against that, but I was fortunate enough to be able to have that privilege, and also, I have a great relationship with my parents, so not everyone's able to do that, but I think a fair amount of people definitely could. And if it's definitely a sacrifice you have to make at certain times, but to me, it was totally worth it. When I was staff too, I made sure I picked up at least one shift per week as a staff nurse and would work multiple per diem jobs, including COVID vaccine clinics, different places that allow me to kind of make different connections with people to, overall improve just my emotional intelligence when I'm working with different people and also making connections. You never know who you're going to meet. And I ended up meeting a lot of great people that honestly I used as part of my recommendations for CRNA school anyways. And I know a lot of schools like to ask you in your interviews what your financial plan is. So I think it's crucial to make sure that you have an answer prepared because these schools don't want you to be financially ruined after. And it shows if you have some kind of a plan that you've thought about it and you're coming across more organized and prepared. And that goes a long way in this profession. So that says a lot about your character if you're able to kind of show them a plan that you have with your life in general. I also listen to several financial podcasts. I personally love the financial podcast stuff. So I listen to guys on YouTube like Caleb Hammer, Dave Ramsey, Graham Stephan. I know some of their stuff may be outdated, but I also think they have a lot of insight, and they also interview people who are in their early 20s, 30s, and even beyond that end up showing what their financial background looks like. So that can end up giving you some inspiration of ideas or being like, oh, okay, I see what they did and that was way wrong. So I think that's always helpful to be familiarizing yourself with. So my overall goal was to minimize my student debt when I came in here. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing if you have any, but having a lot of financial stress on top of school stress will just add way more to your plate than you already need when you're in CRNA school. So trying to pay off those private loans will definitely reduce cost during school.
Yeah, that's great, Ben. Thank you for that. I also lived at home in my first year of working in the ICU. And like you said, Ben, it's not for everyone. There's definitely sacrifices that you have to make, and you have to look at it from an individual perspective. But I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I knew from the very beginning of working in the ICU that I wanted to go to CRNA school, and living at home for that year really allowed me to just put away a decent amount of cash for savings. It then also allowed me to do things like max out my 401k, then also save for when I eventually moved out on my own and got my own place. You alluded to something, Ben, about minimizing student debt and attempting to pay off private loans when you're not in school or before you start. I think that some people overlook the importance of paying off high interest debt. So things like a credit card, if you can pay down a car payment, obviously, if you have a mortgage, usually that's low interest relatively to other things. So if you can try to use some surplus money to pay down those things so you don't have as high of interest payments or you don't have high of payments in general, I think that's super important. And you talked a lot about your financial preparation and working several jobs to essentially just make a little bit more money on the side. So with that money, how did you go about budgeting and getting yourself financially prepared for essentially having no income?
I'm so glad you asked this question, Eric, because I think this is somewhere where I can help a lot of people. And it honestly doesn't take a lot of difficult math at all. So what I did was I have always done this because I honestly enjoy it, and you honestly will find it start to like to enjoy it too after a while when you start to get good at it. But I created a super strict budget, and I started working on it like 6 months in advance before I started CRNA school. Well, I've been budgeting for a while, but making sure I had a really strict one down to the exact dollar amount to make sure it's as specific as possible. The reason why I say 6 months is because it usually takes an average between 6 and 12 months to actually get the budget right. Because when you're being super specific about food and your rent and your bills and your fixed costs and your variable costs, are all over the place. You don't even know where to start. So, once you start doing it month after month, then you kind of can understand where your spending is and where you can need to cut down. So then the quicker you start before CRNA school to kind of get you in that rhythm and get kind of that snowball effect of you moving, the better off you're going to be. And also, it just builds a lot of discipline too to begin with. I think another important part too is to make sure that you're living within your means. I know in CRNA school, it's super easy to when you don't have the money, I almost sometimes feel like it's easier to spend it because, when you're using student debt or your savings and no money's coming in, it's kind of like, whatever, I'm going to make it up in a couple of years. But I think it's really important that you stick to that budget and kind of live within your means because you're going to thank future Eric or future Ben or future Dylan, years from now because the less that you have getting out of school, the quicker you can kind of jumpstart your life and kind of doing what you want with your money. And yeah, I can't emphasize that enough is just how much, budgeting has helped me and how simple the math really is. It's just addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So you don't need to be a genius to do it. It just takes pure discipline.
I did the same thing as you. I made a budget. I lived comparatively probably to you guys. I lived in a lower cost of living area. Rent was probably a little cheaper, but I was in that time period where I decided not to take any travel contracts and just worked as a staff nurse. And that being said, I did work quite a bit of overtime during my time as a staff nurse. So I was able to make extra money that way. But I lived on about, I would say, 3,000 to $3,500 a month pretty comfortably. And I felt like that was really helpful just to establish that budget. And again, you have your fixed costs, you have what you know is going to be pretty close to the same cost every month, and then leave yourself a little bit of room for doing some additional things. But you have to begin your financial discipline early to make it easier on yourself during school. I think that something that is sometimes overlooked by people is also the importance of matching your 401k. We're young-ish. We don't tend to think about, life 30 years from now, but utilizing your 401k match from your employer if you have it, and then also maxing out your 401k. So putting in the $20,000 roughly every single year if you can, if you have that ability, goes so far in terms of your financial life, 3 4 years from now, because if you have that option to contribute to your 401k and max out your 401k, do it, because you'll be in school and you still have that retirement fund making interest. And so when you maybe can't max it out your first year or two out of school, if you're focused on paying down your debt, it's still gaining 5 to 8% of interest pretty consistently. So Ben, in terms of living expenses, what do you recommend, going about that, from school expenses, but also, routine living expenses, like we talked about, the fixed cost expenses during school. What do you recommend for going about that?
I would honestly recommend, like, if you have that extra savings beforehand, you savings in your bank account for living expenses instead of the school expenses, because your school expenses and your tuition are a more fixed cost, versus your living expenses, like I said, can be a lot more variable. Like, I have to move pretty much. I mean, we all have to, but like a lot of us have. I had to move like 3 or 4 times throughout this program, so that's definitely some variable income. Being in Colorado versus Seattle versus Chicago, those are very different in terms of cost of living and cost of apartments. So that's definitely gonna it's gonna be very hard to make that consistent. So you have some amount of money when you take out loans, which is like your savings, you can have a little bit more variable income. So anything to do with variable income, I would recommend using your savings for.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ben. I think that a good approach to it is to try not to drain your savings for tuition expenses and overall, like, school expenses. I think that might not be the most popular opinion, but I think it's almost better if you can utilize your loans for your school expenses and keep some money in your savings that you've worked to save however many years you were working as a nurse. If you have savings, keep that savings for as long as you can. I think that it's a financially responsible trait to keep an emergency fund available in your savings in case if you need some extra money for a month, or you need to repair your car, or whatever it might be, for those surprise expenses, for lack of a better way to put that. I think that it's difficult pill to swallow to say, okay, I'm going to take out more loans for my tuition expenses, but I don't think that it's a bad idea to not drain your savings and to keep that money for living expenses and for surprise expenses that you might not anticipate. Dylan, what about you? What have you done in terms of strategies to prepare for CRNA school, or what did you do in terms of financial preparation for CRNA school? And what have you done during school to help you become physically prepared once you graduate?
After school, I kind of took like a little bit of a different route than I know Ben. I went and I wanted to live in the city for a year. So I went and lived in Chicago. Probably wasn't my best financial decision, but it was a good time, so I can't be too mad about that. And then during that time, I always worked a lot. I always was working overtime, and additionally, it was like during COVID, so there was nothing to do but work. And then the following years, I took a couple of travel assignments, and I put some money to the side. Definitely not nearly enough. If you really want to save up enough to pay for CRNA school, you'll be working for a good amount of time before you ever can apply. So you gotta swallow that pill and just apply and know that you're gonna take the loans because it's gonna be the fastest way to get to the degree. Definitely took an unconventional route to like budgeting. So like I have I'd bought a house during COVID and then I'd bought a new car during COVID. So I kind of like I packed on a lot of expenses that I'm still paying for right now, and I'm kind of just slowly getting through it with all the loan money. But me and Natalie always make sure that we have a like decent savings still set to the side just in case there's anything that comes up. And like Ben said, I ended up having to have hip surgery, couple, what was it, back in February, and that was a big wrench in just like the in the pot of money that we had because it was expensive and our insurance didn't cover as much as we would have liked. But it's something that you kind of have to be ready to plan for and like just always have available just in case. So it was nice to have some extra money saved up just in case of anything like that.
And Dylan, you had some undergraduate loans as well, for your bachelor's, that you had when you graduated and when you were working. So how did you go about having the undergraduate loans, then entering graduate school with those? What were your strategies? What have you learned from reading about those loans and the strategies to mitigate some of the interest on that?
Yeah, so for the undergrad loans, I had the federal loans, which luckily when you enter school again, they go on forbearance since you're going to get FAFSA again for graduate school, which is nice. So I'm no longer paying those, but I did have also some private loans. And the private loans, what I did was to prepare myself. I knew I wasn't going to pay them off because I wasn't active about it when I was working as a nurse. I was, like I said, saving up for a house, saving up for a ring and then the wedding and working to pay off my car. So all those things kind of stacked on top of each other. I ended up refinancing and getting just the lowest rate I could. That way I can make sure I'm making my minimum payment throughout school. That way I don't have to put that on pause and rack up more interest. And then just like I know Ben spoke about this earlier, like just like a nice trick for budgeting. I kind of want to mention that like I read The Richest Man in Babylon. It's a great book. It's by George Clausen. I definitely recommend it. He talks about paying off. It's like a nice story about paying off debt and how you can save money. But the way they do it is they kind of break your money down into like sevenths. So you break it into 1/7 and you split your money up that way. And that way, like you pay into different accounts. So like with your mortgage or your living expenses, however like much it would be, say it's like 3/7 of your paycheck, you put that into a separate account. And then like 1/7 you pay to yourself for your personal use, and then like another seventh would go towards savings. It's just making sure that like you're saving money. The idea behind it is basically if you always save a seventh of each paycheck, in 7 years you would have $70,000 saved, or like whatever you make. So it's like it would take 7 years to make your income. So it's kind of a nice like little way to save. If you don't have any tricks, I definitely recommend looking into The Richest Man in Babylon.
There's definitely a lot of those strategies out there. I think it's most important to find one that works best for you, but also save. You made an excellent point in, you had hip surgery, you had something come up that not necessarily was expected, and the importance of having that savings slash emergency fund is really critical. And it might mean that you take out extra loans for school, but it also means most likely that you have some money just in case if something like that happens. So you spoke of your federal undergraduate loans, Dylan, and when it comes to federal graduate loans, there's a lot of questions with that. And I know I had personally a lot of questions about that going forward. I was grateful enough to um, get quite a bit of scholarships for my undergrad, and I had minimal debt for my undergrad. So I really did not know a whole lot about the process for the federal loans and especially for graduate loans. So there's really two types of federal loans that you can get, and I'll preface that by saying that I think the federal loans is the best way to go for your loans. I would say avoid private loans unless if it's from like an immediate family member. If you're in that situation where an immediate family member offers you a low interest loans, if you have that opportunity, I think that's a great resource. Otherwise, the federal loans, although it is about 8% interest, it's probably the best out there because there's opportunities for tuition reimbursement. There's opportunities for federal work programs that allow you to be reimbursed for your tuition, and there's scholarships as well. So I think that, to preface talking about federal loans, is that these are probably your best option as grad students, but everyone's unique. Everyone has their unique situation. So the two types of federal loans that we can get are the federal unsubsidized graduate loan and then the federal direct plus. And so the unsubsidized loan, you can get a max up to $20,500 a year. And that is plain old. You get that flat payout for your loans. The direct plus is a little bit different in that it essentially involves your total cost of attendance for your school minus whatever that direct unsubsidized is. So it would be your total cost of attendance minus the 20,500. For us, I think it's about $55,000 on top of the 20,500. So we're able to get, as grad students, we're able to get about $75,000 a year for tuition and for living expenses. So our tuition is right around 45 or so $1,000 a year. So you're able to get additional money for living expenses as well.
I was gonna say, I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize either is like, I know when I applied for school, like that was like one thing I was always like, oh, like how am I gonna pay for everything? Like I always heard you can take it out in loans, but I never really understood what they meant. I think something that's like nice to understand is like each quarter, when you get your loan disbursement, once the school gets paid, they reimburse you and they send you the remaining balance, which is usually like roughly like 7,000, 7,500, and that's what you'll have for the next 3 months if your school works on a quarter system. So like you get all that money up front, and this is another thing that's going to go back to budgeting. It's important to make sure that you don't spend it all in the first month because that's all you have for the next 2 months until that next disbursement comes around for that next quarter. But that wasn't something I really realized until I got into school.
Thank you for saying that, Dylan. That's an excellent point. And I will even add to that is that that money increases with the number of dependents that you have in terms of your taxes and how many dependents you claim on your taxes. So that's just the amount that we can get without having any kids, and then you can get more and get an adjustment as well based on if your cost of living is slightly different. But typically, the total cost of attendance is relatively generous. That's set by the college, so you're able to get out a decent amount of money that covers your tuition expenses and then also your living expenses as well. For the direct plus, those interest rates are a little bit higher. Unfortunately, they have continued to increase. Right now, they're at 9.08%. And then the unsubsidized, which is that $20,500, the flat disbursement is 8.08%. So it's a little bit lower interest, but again, you don't get as much of a disbursement with that. I think that it's important to know that there's options to pay for your tuition after school as well. A lot of anesthesia groups, even some hospitals will give you loan reimbursement, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be like federally based. There's many groups that will either give you a sign-on bonus, tuition reimbursement, completion bonus, whatever it might be. And so knowing that does help with some of the loans, but I think it's even more so important to be responsible. Dylan said it that your disbursement is all that you get. So that's the importance of budgeting before you even start school, and then budgeting while you're in school as well, and just living within your means, paying for things that are only necessities, and making sacrifices that you might not have made while you're working as a nurse because quite simply the lifestyle is different. So Ben, we alluded to about the scholarships a little bit. Do you have anything else with regards to federal loans that you might want to talk about?
I know grad school scholarships are a little bit few and far between. They're a lot harder to grab than undergrad scholarships, but they are out there, and there always is money that needs to be taken up by somebody. And so I would just recommend that even if you don't fit the criteria that they're looking for, to still apply, because even if you don't fit it, they have to give the money away. And I know I did that with like 20 or 30 scholarships before I applied. Granted, I could have looked a little harder because I didn't end up getting any of them, but I do know that there are a lot out there that can make your life a lot easier, even if it's just like 1,000 or 2,000. Like I think I saw one for being a lefty, like, and I'm left-handed, so like it's just like it's random stuff like that where you're going to be able to find some stuff. So just make sure you're doing that research beforehand. And then the only other thing I was going to add too was if you are looking to make a little bit of extra money before uh, starting school, like look into the program and what they're able to allow. Like I know ours, like I said, was able to live online, or it could be online for the first 9 months. And some of them almost recommend that you stay as an ICU nurse for a little bit beforehand. And, you're making a little bit of extra cash being able to work part-time. And some programs don't offer that at all. So even just taking that burden off of, let's say, 9 months to a year of CRNA school, so you're only really not having to live without an income for 2 years or 27 months, kind of makes like that's a 30-year cost that are really shut down. So just make sure you're doing your research with that while applying. And when you do get to that point where you're in your third year of CRNA school and you see these sign-on bonuses from places, just make sure that you're not signing on right away unless you know exactly where you're after graduation, or have, you have your whole plan set up, which if you do, great for you. But if not, be a little picky with that.
Yeah, and I would even say to be smart with how you go about taking those sign-on bonuses. Like you said, don't choose the first one you see. If you can get it in the form of a completion bonus, that's great as well. So really, just to recap this episode, we discussed quite a bit, and I hope that for those listening that you take something away from this. But I would say that our financial pearls are that federal loans are preferred. I think that if you can avoid high interest private loans and at the bare minimum try to refinance those loans, as Dylan alluded to with the undergraduate loans, those were federal. But if you can refinance some loans, that's good as well. I would say that the federal loans of 8% are about as good as you're going to get, most likely, compared to private loans that are, 15, 20%. And that interest really adds up. And you just want to have as minimal interest as possible. You do have a grace period. Once you graduate, you have 6 months where you do not have to pay any loans. So that's where you have 6 months after graduation until your payments start. And so a good strategy is to try to make some money in that time to pay off the interest, because the interest that you accrue during your time in school does not compound until after those 6 months. So if you can pay off your interest on your loans, then you're then just getting the interest rates on the original principal, and there's no interest that is compounded onto that principal amount before those 6 months. And Ben, you talked about being able to work a little bit in school. I think that it's important to just examine your unique situation. Everyone is a little bit different. I elected to not work as much because I just knew that as soon as I started to get stressed out with school, I was going to probably blame work first. So I worked PRN a little bit at the beginning of school, but once we really got into our third quarter and started to become, in person and full time and committed, not that it was not difficult during those first 2 months, but it's definitely a lot of like the pathophysiology, pharmacology, physiology, and it's a little bit more manageable. Whereas once you start the advanced anatomy and physiology and health assessment for our program, at least, that our third quarter is when we started to go in person, and definitely started to get very difficult, not only in terms of the content, but also now with the scheduling and the workload just continues to build as you progress throughout the program.
I just want to say I totally agree with that too. I think it just is like program depending, because I have a friend who's at ECU, and she told me that they actually recommend that they work in the ICU for that first 9 months, so they can almost work full time. With our program, a lot, and so take what you can with it, but just kind of be prepared when you're looking at schools, I'd say, to like know what you're able to not and what they recommend.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of the planning process, and trying to find a place where maybe you can work part-time or PRN during the first part of the program may be important to you as well. I would say do not be hesitant to take out extra loans, but also be smart. If you've gotten anything from this podcast, I want it to be live within your means and be fiscally responsible. I think that there's a fine line between taking out extra loans just so you can spend as much money as you want, or take out extra loans so that you can maintain some money in your savings and have an emergency fund available. Use the federal loans for your tuition, for the bulk of your living expenses, and then use some savings if you have that opportunity for additional expenses and an emergency fund as well. Pay down your high interest debt. I think that's so important that you try to get rid of a car payment if you can, or refinance your mortgage, whatever works for you. And everyone again is different. And I think having a reliable car, especially for our program where we commute frequently, is critical. And I don't know, I had car troubles like when we first started this program, and thankfully it happened then versus happening, now when we're about to go off to clinical and be commuting. Just to reiterate what we've discussed throughout this podcast is live within your means. I know that you might have a travel nurse contract, and bedside ICU nurses do make a good income and have a good quality of life. But I would say that you have to get into the mindset and have to be disciplined to start living within your means and to begin to budget as much as possible, because it's only going to help you once you get into school, and it's going to help you even more so when you graduate, when you have a little bit less of loans. And when you have 150, $200,000 worth of loans at 8%, any subtraction to that amount is a good thing. So there's really no reason why 5 years after school, CRNAs should be in financial despair. It's a great quality of life. It's great pay. It's a great work-life balance, and it's a great profession. So you start your budgeting and start your financial discipline early. It's only going to help you as you transition into practice as well. And at the end of the day, this is simply advice from us three. And we really understand that everyone's situation is different. There's going to be people that absolutely do not agree with us and swear us off. And again, this is just us trying to talk about what worked for us, what discipline strategies worked for us, and what have we done to financially prepare for school, and then also be financially disciplined during school as well. So without further ado, this is the end of the second episode of the series on transitioning from RN to SRNA. Third episode coming soon.